Really, I'm here today to publicly shame myself. So let's cast our minds back to 2022 and see what we can remember about that year. The Men's World Cup was happening in a country that had like multiple human rights violations. The UK was about to have an undemocratically elected prime minister. In fact, that happened multiple times in 2022. And there was also a record breaking heat wave that year. So, really, so many parallels and similarities between this now present day in 2026 and 4 years ago. Mainly talking about the UK because in 2022, that's where I live. And that's where I still live now. In fact, in that year, the monarch did die. And we're only halfway through this year. So, there's still a chance for more similarities. But what was going on in 2022 for me personally? I feel like my life was really like back in action post COVID. So to give you like a bit of context, I moved back to Ireland in 2020 because of the lockdowns, was meant to be there for 3 months and I ended up staying for like basically a year and a half. All I did in that time was work and read. I was reading an insane amount of books. Moved back to London like midway through 2021. So I would say 2022 was my first year of having my life back in full swing. I was like really, really busy. I was going out a lot. I was hanging out with a lot of people. I was just doing like so many fun things, which left less time for reading, which was totally a good thing. Like my life was richer for more like varied experiences. I do not want to go back to 2020 when basically all I was doing was reading. But I was still acquiring books like very, very rapidly. And I was also out and about going back into bookshops again. So this meant I was acquiring books at a far more rapid rate than I was reading them. I should also say in 2022, I also met the love of my life. Can't really recap 2022 without mentioning like the best thing that's ever happened to me. That didn't happen until like the last quarter of the year. I don't think it really impacts my reading in any way. I mean, none of the other stuff that I've mentioned really impacted my life that much. But anyway, that's all of the context. Let's get into the numbers. It surprises no one that I have a spreadsheet for all of my reading and book acquiring. So in 2022, I acquired 175 books. That's not necessarily buying books. Like books come into my life in lots of different ways. So some of it is obviously buying my own purchases, but it's also gifts and books from publishers and books for my work. But in 2022, I only read 96 books. So you can see where there is starting to be a massive gap between what I was acquiring and what I was reading. And actually, I really blame 2022 and 2023 for like how massive my physical TBR currently is. Of that 175 books I acquired, I have read 126 of those. So that means there are 49 books that I acquired that year that I haven't read. But of that 175 books that I acquired, I unhauled 58 of them. 41 of those were books that I read and was like, I don't want these anymore, so send them back into the world. But there were actually 17 books that I unhauled having not read them. So basically, all of this whittled down to I still own 117 of the books that I acquired in that year. 85 of them I have read, and 32 of them are still on my shelves unread. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to publicly shame myself with all of the books that I still have unread from 4 years ago. So I'm going to start with nonfiction because out of all of the ways that I kind of categorize my reading, nonfiction makes up essentially the bulk of these unread books. So there are 15 nonfiction books that I haven't read yet. 6 of them were books that I bought for myself, and 9 were books that I got from like other places. So that could be from like a publisher or a friend passing on something they didn't want anymore. I do want to start making a more conscious effort to read more nonfiction. And I said I would do that at the start of the year, and it hasn't really happened. But I used to read so much more nonfiction. So like in 2021, I read 28 books of nonfiction. I mean, for half of that year, I was not doing anything apart from reading. But even in 2022, so the year that we're discussing, I read 23 nonfiction books. And then from that year onwards, like 2023, 2024, I read 14 books of nonfiction in those years. And then last year, I only read 8 nonfiction books. So essentially, I've left myself with this like backlog of nonfiction that I still am interested in reading. I think a lot of my nonfiction reading started to get quite samey as well. Like I was reading about like very similar topics and I maybe didn't need multiple books about the same topic. That will become clear as we go through the books. So I picked up Mind the Gap: The Truth About Desire and How to Future Proof Your Sex Life by Dr. Karen Gurney. So Karen Gurney is someone whose work I have really admired, especially her work related to obviously like female sexuality and the orgasm gap. This is a book that really explores sex and desire from a female perspective and really interrogates the like social circumstances and scientific research into why there is an orgasm gap. Topics of gender and sexuality and sex are things that have like interested me for a very long time. I've always liked learning more about them and reading more about them. I was doing a lot of dating in 2022, so maybe this is something that felt like it was quite relevant. But as I said, met the love of my life at the end of 2022, so didn't feel as relevant anymore. Am I going to leave that bit in? Maybe not. Basically, I have like loads of books on essentially the same topic. So Amazing Disgrace by Grace Campbell is a book that is about the author's experience of feeling shame about sex and rejection and mental health. It's a book about the author at 27 years of age kind of reclaiming her shame and not feeling embarrassed about things anymore. I do ponder whether like my time to read this book has maybe passed. Similarly with Too Fat, Too Slutty, Too Loud: The Rise and Reign of Unruly Women. This is by Anne Helen Peterson. This book is essentially an exploration of what it means to kind of be too much of anything and really like interrogates that, particularly in relation to womanhood. Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski is another book that is like directly about female pleasure and sexual experience. Another author whose work I have really admired from what I've seen of her on like podcasts and that kind of thing, but haven't read her book yet. Turned On: Science, Sex and Robots by Kate Devlin. This time a book about gender and sexuality and sexual experience, but its intersection with technology. This is a topic that I've been really fascinated by for a number of years. It all sort of began when I was at university and I was doing a writing, sci-fi and fantasy module as part of my English and creative writing degree. And it was not really the module that I wanted to do. I just needed like another creative writing credit. So when it came to writing my like submitted fiction, like short story piece for that module, I was really trying to think about like, okay, I'm not really that interested in sci-fi, but what am I interested in? And I was very much in like an ardent feminist phase. Not that I'm not like obviously still in that phase, but like I was really sort of defined by learning more about feminism and gender and sexuality. Needing to write that piece really sort of piqued my interest in the intersections between those types of topics and tech. Last year, I read Laura Bates's book about AI and the dangers that poses, particularly for women and particularly in a sexual context. So this book came out a few years previously, but I think would still be really interesting to have kind of a rounded overview of the topic from multiple sources. Speaking of Laura Bates, I have actually not read her first book, Everyday Sexism. So this is the book that kind of kicked it all off. Laura Bates is the founder of the Everyday Sexism, I guess like movement, which was an online platform. I think she actually started it on Twitter, but I might be lying. Where women just submitted their experiences of sexism in their everyday lives. Laura Bates is someone whose work I have continued to admire for many, many years. I've been fortunate enough to work with her on a couple of occasions, but it's kind of shocking that I've not read her like original book, and I would like to rectify that because I want to read literally everything that she ever does. I'm trying to do these books in an order that kind of like makes sense. So these next two books are about kind of similar topics, and this is Give Birth Like a Feminist by Millie Hill. It's so funny because I remember picking up this book in kind of like an academic interest kind of way. Like I read around lots of different topics around sexism and misogyny. So I was quite interested in this kind of giving birth perspective. But at that time, I had like no real interest in having children of my own. And as I said, in 2022, I met the love of my life, and that has sort of changed my perspective now. So I guess my interest in this book has become like less academic and more real world. But I think I'm also quite cautious of the line that exists between like having a very informed pregnancy and birth, but also just like the benefits of surrounding yourself by like positive stories and not putting like pressure on yourself to have like the most perfect pregnancy, the most perfect birth. I mean, I have absolutely no immediate plans to be pregnant. So I don't know if it's like a good thing to read this book now, where it still feels like quite in the distance, so I can have like a less emotional connection to it, or whether I should save it for when it's like actually relevant in my life. And I Am Not Your Baby Mother by Candace Braithwaite is another book about pregnancy and giving birth, but specifically about the Black experience of that and how it differs from a white experience. For example, it looks at the data and studies that show that Black women's pain is treated less seriously, and all of the systemic ways that Black women are disadvantaged when compared to like white parents. So in 2021, I was obsessed by Pluto Press, who were like a radical political publisher. I mean, I'm still obsessed with what they do, but I read a bunch of their books, particularly from the Outspoken series, and I thought they were so brilliant that I reached out to the publisher and asked if they would be happy to send me some more. They did send me a bunch. They were so kind. Some of them I have read, some of them I have not got a chance to read yet, which is really bad form for me. So I would like to fix that really soon, especially considering like the urgency of some of the topics that these books are about. A Feminist Theory of Violence by Francois Verges. This is about the intersection of misogyny and violence, particularly through like a decolonization perspective. And then I have 3 books from their Outspoken series. So Make Bosses Pay, Why We Need Unions. Obviously a book about like unacceptable like labor conditions. Tangled in Terror, Uprooting Islamophobia. Islamophobia obviously still a topic that is so important to inform yourself about and read about. And then Burnt, Fighting for Climate Justice by Chris Saltmarsh. I mean, as I said, we are literally in the middle of a record-breaking heat wave as I'm filming this. So staying informed about the climate crisis is something that's really important. A Girlhood, A Letter to My Transgender Daughter by Carolyn Hayes. So this is a book that is about the trans experience, but from a parent's perspective. I have read quite a few books by trans authors, but I've never read a book from a parent's perspective and what it is like to have a child, whether that's like a literal child or your grown-up child, going through that experience of coming out as trans and trying to support them through it. So this is definitely one that I still want to read. Dead Famous by Greg Jenner. So I picked this up because I was really into Greg Jenner's podcast at the time. I have slightly like petered off in my interest from it because there was just so many episodes and I couldn't keep up with it, but I think I would really like to listen to this one on audio. It is a historical exploration of the kind of idea of celebrity. So, like, who the first celebrities are and like our understanding of what it means to be famous throughout time. Yeah, I think audio is the way that I would like to experience this one. And then I have like this very dinky version of Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell. Basically, I went to Barcelona by myself on a solo trip. I think it was like my first like proper solo trip to Europe. So I decided that I needed to pick up a copy of Homage to Catalonia and I just haven't read it yet. I have this idea of like going back to Barcelona and then that being the time that I read this book, but like I don't know when that's going to happen again, so I should just read it. Okay, so that's all of the nonfiction. There are just 4 books of adult like contemporary fiction left, so I did pretty well with that. Untrue Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Let me explain my relationship with this book. So I am a huge Taylor Jenkins Reid fan. I was a fan before Evelyn Hugo. Like I was one of the OG fans. I started with After I Do, and then I binged Maybe in Another Light and Forever Interrupted, and then I didn't read One True Loves for some reason. Fast forward, Taylor Jenkins Reid becomes like a huge deal. I've read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones and the Six, Malibu Rising, Atmosphere, and in all of that time I have not read One True Loves, which is her novel that is about a woman who on the eve of her first wedding anniversary with her husband, he like disappears in this helicopter disaster. She never like hears what happens to him. Years later, he has been presumed dead and she has moved on with her life and created and built a new life for herself, including a new partner. And then one day at a family dinner, she receives a phone call from her husband, the one that went missing. And the reason I haven't read this yet is because that means there would be no Taylor Jenkins Reid books left for me to read. But there have been multiple occasions where she has announced a new book is coming out, and I haven't used that as a reason to like read this one. I need to get over it basically and just read it because I think I'll love it. This is The Private Joys of Nena Maloney, which is about like one girl who is like approaching adulthood and she wants to reconnect with her Nigerian heritage. But this starts to put a strain on her relationship with her mother as she's starting to ask more and more questions about her father and her mother is refusing to answer. So it essentially sends Nena off on this kind of journey of what it means to be her, her sense of self, etc. All topics that I am really, really interested in. So again, I should be picking this up. Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I feel like I have just been waiting for like the perfect time to read this book. It is a book that has like so much critical acclaim. It is a book of like such significant importance that I feel like I've just been waiting for the perfect time to be able to like fully digest this. And like that perfect time is just not going to come. So I do need to just sit down and read this one and marvel at how fantastic it is. I have been trying to commit to a rule where I don't have more than one unread book by a single author on my shelves. And this is one of two Toni Morrisons that I have unread on my shelves. So I should read this. And then I pre-ordered this book in hardback in 2022 and I still haven't read it. It is 30 Things I Love About Myself. This is a book about a woman who in the year that she is 30, she decides to do like these 30 like bold things in a kind of like self-help mission sort of way. And I need to read this book this year, not only because it has been on my TBR since 2022 and I pre-ordered it, but because I am 30 at the moment. So this is the time where I should be reading this book, right? I should also say that I bought 3 of those books and was given one of them. I have 3 books for younger readers, so 1 children's book and 2 young adult books. All of these I purchased for myself. The Boxer by Nikesh Shukla. This is a young adult book about a teenage boy's experience of racism in London and the sense of community that boxing helps him to get. I have read some of this author's nonfiction writing before and got so much value out of it, and this is exactly the type of young adult fiction that I find so much value in. So I definitely do want to read this. Blood to Poison by Mary Watson. I have meant to read this like for so many years of the Irish Readathon and just haven't got round to it. I think I tried it one year and it just wasn't working out for me. So I would like to give it another shot. This young adult book is about kind of generations of women within the same family that have a curse passed down where one woman in every generation is destined to die young. And it's a book that is largely about like feminine rage and how that intersects with like witchiness. And then The Lost Tide Warriors by Catherine Doyle. I have read quite a few Catherine Doyle books previously, including the first book in this series, which was The Stormkeeper's Island. I really enjoyed that first book. I definitely will read this second book. And Catherine Doyle is another author who I have multiple unread books from her on my shelves, so I do want to rectify that. This is a magical middle grade inspired by Irish myths, so that's definitely something that I'm interested in. And as I said, did really enjoy the first book in the series. Then there are a bunch of classics. I am not going to get them all out right now because my Penguin English Library books live on like the very top shelf in my bedroom. And to be completely honest with you, I just cannot be arsed getting them. But there are 10 of them. So Ivanhoe, this is a book that I think is about horse racing, but I might be lying. Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. I do think this is one of the classics that I really do want to read this year. I have read a couple of Elizabeth Gaskell books, and I think I'm slightly intimidated by the size of Wives and Daughters, so I might tackle it via audiobook. I have a couple of Dickens books, so Dombey and Son and The Old Curiosity Shop. I don't think I'm going to be reading these anytime soon, but as I've said multiple times about my Penguin English Library collection, it is like a lifetime goal to try and read those books, not like an immediate goal. The Last Chronicle of Barset is part of like a series, so I'm obviously not going to be getting to this one anytime soon. New Grub Street, I don't really know like tons about this book. And then The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner, literally know nothing about it. Brideshead Revisited, I feel like could be a classic that I will tackle this year. And then I don't really know about The Way of All Flesh and The Scarlet Pimpernel. And that is everything. So realistically, what sort of dent am I making in this by the end of the year? I think ideally reading all of the contemporary fiction would be great. So the adult fiction, the young adult fiction, and the children's fiction. Although 2 of those books are by Irish authors, so I could like save those for March next year when I read exclusively Irish books for the Irish Readathon. The classics, as I said, probably like two of them. That would be great. And we started with the nonfiction, of which there is so much. I set myself a goal of reading 12 nonfiction books this year, and I am not doing that at like a one book a month rate. I have only read 3 nonfiction books. So there's a bit of catching up to do there. So maybe if I could like really focus on maybe like halving this pile of nonfiction. But as you'll have seen as I went through it and I mentioned throughout, like a lot of the books are on like very similar topics. And maybe I just don't need to read all of them. If you have any thoughts on any of the books I've mentioned, if you want to share whether you liked them or not, that would be super helpful in terms of me figuring out whether I do want to read all of these books. I will be doing this same video for other years. I did do a video about 2021 quite a while ago. So I think before the end of the year, I will look to do a video on 2023, 2024, and even like last year and checking in on whether I read the books that I bought last year. There are still quite a few books that I have on my TBR even, earlier than 2021. So maybe I could do that. And then we will do like come full circle and I will revisit 2021 again and see how much progress I have made on those books since I made the first video about 2021. Does that make sense? Did you follow? Okay, I now need to put back loads of books. So that's going to take me a while. I actually can't believe I have a book on this list that I pre-ordered. I pre-ordered the hardback and still haven't read it. That's ridiculous. Okay, I'm going to go. If you want to let me know you're here, but you don't have anything in particular to say, can you leave me like a clock emoji to symbolize time and the fact that it has been too damn long that these books have been sat on my shelves unloved and unread. Okay, bye. I will speak to you in my next video.